The winter never really ended for her. It only settled deeper in the bones. Out here, in a land scarred by war and silence, a widow rises before dawn to feed a life that no longer feels her own. Then one morning, they bring her a stallion, wild, broken, eyes full of storms. He fights every hand that dares to touch him. She understands, because she's been fighting ghosts too. In the cold breath between them, something begins to thaw, not through force, but through trust. And when the world demands one more act of courage, she'll learn that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let go. The morning rose gray and slow over the northern hills, light spilling like cold milk through the bare branches. Frost clung to the grass, brittle and white, and the air carried that post-war silence that felt almost reverent, too still for the living, too soft for ghosts. The farmhouse at the edge of the valley stood half-forgotten, its paint flaking, its windows dull with the breath of another lonely winter. Claire Marin stood by the barn door, one hand resting on the splintered wood, the other cupped around a tin mug of cooling coffee. Steam drifted upward, brief and insubstantial. Her hair, once wheat-colored, now held the same faded gray as the frost. Behind her, the old barn groaned when the wind shifted, a weary exhale from timbers that had seen too many seasons and too few hands to mend them. Down the road, the sound of an engine broke the stillness. It was a long, low rumble, unfamiliar yet inevitable, like thunder crossing the plain. Claire didn't move at first. She just listened to the hum of the machine, the crunch of tires on frozen dirt, and the faint jingle of metal against wood. When the truck crested the rise and pulled into her yard, a small cloud of exhaust rose into the dawn. The driver climbed down, boots crunching. He didn't meet her eyes. "Got one for you," he said, voice clipped, practical. "Caught him up past the ridge. Mean one. They couldn't break him." Claire's gaze drifted toward the trailer hitched behind the truck. Inside, shadows moved, restless, strong. A sharp breath of air fogged the metal slats, followed by a deep, warning snort. The stallion's outline shifted, dark, tall, and scarred, his body a map of old battles. His eyes gleamed through the frost-edged bars, bright as coals in the dim light. "He's wild," the man added. "Too wild." They figured if anyone could. "I'm not training anymore," Claire cut in, her voice hoarse from disuse. The driver only shrugged, flicked his cigarette into the snow, and walked back to the truck. "Orders from the district. He's yours till they say otherwise." When the truck pulled away, the yard fell silent again, except for the horse. He pawed once at the floor, then twice, metal shuddering beneath him. Claire stepped closer, boots crunching over the frost. The stallion swung his head toward her, ears flat, muscles coiled. His breath came out in bursts of white, fierce and unyielding. For a long time, they simply stared at each other, two remnants of things once fierce and whole. In his defiance, she saw her own reflection, something wild that refused to die, no matter how the world had tried. A crow cawed from a dead oak. The cold tightened around her chest. Claire set the mug down on the fence post, the handle steaming against the frost, and whispered, maybe to him, maybe to herself, "All right then, let's see what's left of us." Before the war, the Marin farm had been a place of laughter. Horses had filled the pastures like rippling bronze beneath the sun, their manes catching light as Claire's husband Samuel rode beside her, his voice carrying over the wind. They had trained cavalry stock then, disciplined, fearless creatures that mirrored the young nation's hunger for victory. The barn was full of life and work and the smell of oiled leather, hay and grain. But war devours everything it touches, even the things that never set foot on the battlefield.
When the news came that Samuel's regiment would not return, the horses seemed to feel it first. They grew restless, nervous. The rhythm of hooves once filled the valley. Then silence took its place. In the years that followed, Claire stopped training. She tended to what was left. One lame gelding, a few hens, the hollow echo of what had been a home. She spoke to no one unless she had to. The world beyond her fields had grown strange. Rebuilt towns, new faces, men returning in pieces. She kept to her land, mending fences, watching seasons turn with quiet resentment. Then came the letter from the district. A requisition, not a request. Wild horse, captured near the old logging trails. Dangerous, unmanageable. They needed someone who understood horses, someone who could contain what others couldn't. There was a kind of dark humor in it, how the war had stripped her of purpose, only to offer it back, wrapped in barbed wire. The day after the truck left, Claire stood by the trailer again. Frost had begun to melt, dripping down the metal walls like slow tears. The stallion hadn't eaten much, the hay untouched, water bucket half frozen. When she opened the door, he shifted, wary, nostrils flaring at the scent of humans. She said nothing, just stood there, let him see her. He was magnificent, even beneath the scars, a deep chestnut darkened by mud and frost, his mane tangled and wild. There was a long mark across his shoulder, the kind of wound that comes from running through wire. He had survived something that should have broken him. That first week, Claire didn't try to touch him. She only worked near the corral, repairing old rails, hauling feed, letting her movements fall into quiet patterns. The stallion watched her from the edges, never blinking for long. Some nights she heard him pacing, snorting softly into the wind, the way Samuel once did when restless before dawn rides. Gradually, he began to listen. When she spoke, his ears turned toward her. When she walked the fence line, he followed from a distance. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was attention. And attention, she had learned long ago, was the first step towards grace. One evening, she found herself standing at the fence long after sunset, a lantern glowing gold against the dark. The stallion stood in the far corner, shadow and muscle. The stars overhead were cold and sharp. She whispered his name, not the one the district had written, but one she chose herself. She said, "Valor." The word hung in the air, fragile, trembling. The stallion lifted his head, ears pricked. A breath passed between them, white against the night. In that moment, something shifted, not enough to bridge the distance, but enough to remind her what it felt like when another being looked back and truly saw her. For the first time in years, Claire went to bed before dawn. The wind brushed against the window panes, and in her dreams she saw the world before the war. The fields full again, her husband's laughter, the steady rhythm of hooves like a heartbeat returning home.
Winter deepened, settling over the valley like a shroud. The world grew quiet, fields brittle with frost, streams slowed to glass. Each morning, Claire's breath lingered in the barn air like smoke, mingling with the scent of hay and leather. The stallion, VALOR, was still a storm behind his eyes, but the rage in him had begun to cool into something quieter, not peace, but endurance. Weeks passed in measured silence. Claire worked without hurry, without hope of gratitude. She brushed the mud from his coat when he allowed it, repaired his halter when he tore it loose. Some days he stood still as if testing her resolve. Other days he lunged and struck the fence, a wild god resisting his mortal cage. Yet she did not retreat.
One afternoon, as snow threatened the horizon, she led him out into the open paddock for the first time. The rope between them was short, her glove tight around it. Valor shifted, his muscles coiled and alive. She could feel his power through the line, that trembling, dangerous readiness. "You don't owe me obedience," she said softly. "Just trust, for one breath." He snorted, pawed the ground, and for a long moment neither moved. The air was heavy with the scent of thawing earth and coming snow. Then without warning, he reared, hooves slashing the sky. The rope burned through her glove as she fought for balance. The world narrowed to breath and heartbeat, the sound of hooves and the taste of iron in the air. He could have killed her. Instead, he landed, trembling, and stopped. Their eyes met. Not in dominance, not in victory, but in recognition. Two creatures who had lost too much to fear anything smaller than death. That night, Claire sat in the barn long after the lamps went out. The storm outside had come, snow beating against the wood like the fists of ghosts. Valor lay down for the first time since his arrival, his body finally yielding to rest. She watched him breathe, his sides rising and falling in slow rhythm. "You remind me of him," she whispered, too proud to stay, too brave to survive. The next day, I brought the letter. The government wanted the stallion transferred to a training facility 2 towns east, promising asset, potential for Majid's service. They offered a modest sum. She could refuse, but then the horse would be taken by force. It was the same uniform letterhead as Samuel's death notice. Claire folded it twice and slipped it into her coat pocket. She walked out to the corral. Valor stood still in the snow, watching her as if he sensed the change. She rested her hands on the fence post, feeling the cold bite through the wood. "You're not theirs," she said. "Not anymore." Over the following days, she prepared without admitting what for. She gathered provisions, repaired an old harness, and oiled Samuel's saddle, though she had not touched it in years. At night, she dreamed of running, the wind, the sound of pursuit, the taste of freedom laced with terror. The soldiers came at dawn, just as the first light broke through the snow clouds. 2 men in dark coats, polite but resolute. "Mrs. Marin," one said, "we're here for the horse." Claire nodded slowly. "He's not ready." "I'm afraid we can't wait, ma'am." Valor sensed them before they reached the barn, his body tensed, nostrils flaring, hooves scraping the floor. When they tried to approach, he lunged, eyes wild with fire and memory. The men stepped back, startled. Claire moved to his side, murmuring softly, her voice breaking the air like prayer. "Easy, easy, boy. It's all right." He calmed only when her hand rested on his neck. The soldiers exchanged a look. "Mrs. Marin, we'll need you to step aside." She didn't move. "You won't take him." The silence that followed was colder than the wind. One of the men reached for the halter. Valor reared again, knocking over the gate. The soldiers shouted, stumbling back. Claire grabbed the rope, not to restrain him, but to guide. "Run," she whispered. He hesitated, confused by freedom, by her trembling hands unfastening his rope. Then the command came again, fierce, desperate. "Go!" The stallion bolted, smashing through the snow-frosted fence, a blur of red and white, vanishing into the pines. The sound of his hooves faded into the hills, echoing like thunder rolling away from the world. The soldiers shouted orders, one giving chase, but the storm had already swallowed him. When they turned back, Claire stood motionless, her coat torn, her gloves burned through. "You'll answer for this," one said, breathless. She only nodded, eyes fixed on the tree line where the last flake still fell, silver and silent. For the first time in years, she smiled, not in joy, but in defiance. That night, she packed a small bag, took Samuel's photo from the mantel, and saddled the lame gelding. The storm was easing, but the world beyond her farm was still buried in white. Somewhere out there, Valor was running. Somewhere, he was alive. and that was enough.
The weeks that followed blurred into a hollow silence. Snow melted into mud, the creeks began to stir again, and still no sign of valor. Claire's farm stood as it had before. Fences mended, barns swept, the routine intact, yet everything felt emptied of breath. Every hoofprint that thawed and vanished from the pasture seemed to erase a piece of her defiance, her purpose, her pulse. She was not arrested. The soldiers never came back. Perhaps they wrote her off as a grief-stricken widow, unfit for prosecution. Or perhaps someone higher up decided a horse was not worth the trouble. Either way, the world moved on without her. But Claire did not move with it. She stopped writing letters to her sister in Portland. She stopped attending the Sunday market. The horses that remained grew restless under her care, sensing the stillness that clung to her like frost. She did her work with quiet precision, every motion a mechanical echo of the woman she once was. Feed, water, brush, repeat. Days began and ended without difference. At night, she sat in the loft above the barn, the lantern dimmed, staring out toward the woods. Sometimes she imagined hearing distant hooves on the frozen earth. Sometimes she whispered his name into the dark, only to hear it swallowed by wind. "Valor," she would murmur, "find the open ground." Months passed. Spring came with a reluctant color, soft green pressing through the thaw. Life returned, but not to her. When the first foal of the season was born, she couldn't even bring herself to name it. Then came the drought. By midsummer, the fields were brittle, the well half dry, and the air carried the taste of dust. Claire's body weakened from long days without rest or appetite. She began to walk with the gait of someone half buried in yesterday. One evening, while repairing a section of fence on the edge of her property, she paused. In the distance, across the open field, something moved, a shape too large for deer, too wild for cattle. It was gone as quickly as it appeared. Her heart stumbled against her ribs. The next morning, she found prints, deep, fresh, unmistakable. Hooves, large, unshod. The tracks led toward the riverbed, then vanished into stone and shadow. She followed them until dusk, breath sharp in her throat. Her hands trembled as she crouched to touch the earth. It was still warm. He had been there. That night she dreamed of fire, the same vision that haunted her since Samuel's death. The barn collapsing, the smell of smoke, the sound of screaming horses. In the dream, it was always her fault, always her hands too slow to open the door. She woke up gasping, clutching her chest as if to stop her heart from galloping away. Days passed, then weeks. The tracks didn't return. Hope, like every other wild thing, retreated back into the woods. Until the storm. It struck in late autumn, a thunderstorm that came without warning, tearing through the valley like a reckoning. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the hills in violent flashes. Claire ran from the barn to secure the gate, the wind clawing at her coat. She had nearly reached the latch when she froze. There, in the field beyond, a dark figure struggled against the rain. A horse, mud-slicked and shivering. Its mane hung heavy, tangled with briars, its body scarred and lean. Valor. He was thinner now, one ear torn, eyes wild, but not with fear. When he saw her, he took a hesitant step forward, then stopped, trembling. Claire's breath caught. "You came back," she whispered. The wind swallowed her words, but he seemed to hear.
She opened the gate slowly, her hand extended, voice steady despite the storm. "It's all right. No one's chasing you." Valor hesitated, then moved toward her, one step, then another, until the space between them closed. Rain poured off their faces, pooling into the ground beneath them. When his muzzle brushed her shoulder, Claire's body broke into sobs that the thunder tried and failed to drown. She led him inside, dried him, fed him what little hay she had left. He ate greedily, then stood, motionless, eyes closed. Exhaustion radiated from him, the kind of weariness only the free could understand. That night, Claire sat beside him in the straw, her back against the stall wall. The storm's voice softened into a distant rumble. "You shouldn't have come back," she said quietly. "Freedom was the point." Valor shifted, ears flicking toward her voice. "But, I suppose," she continued, half smiling through her tears, "we're both too stubborn to stay gone." For the first time in years, she slept without dreaming. In the days that followed, Valor began to heal again. His coat regained its sheen, his wounds closed, but something had changed. He no longer fought her hand or the lead. He followed her through the pasture like a shadow, calm, silent, resolute. And though Claire did not say it aloud, she knew this was not the same kind of trust they had before. It was something heavier, the kind of bond born from loss, tempered by choice. He had run free and returned anyway, and she, who had given him freedom, was finally beginning to understand what forgiveness might look like.
The days after the storm settled into a rhythm of quiet labor and unspoken understanding. Morning light crept through the barn slats, dust motes drifting in the beams like ghosts of forgotten prayers. Claire's hands, once trembling from grief, moved with steadiness now, brushing Valor's coat, cleaning his hooves, repairing the fences he had shattered months before. Valor watched her always, eyes deep and unreadable, his breath slow and warm against the cold air. He no longer flinched when she approached. When she spoke, he listened, his ears angling toward her voice. The silence between them, once jagged, had softened into something whole. Claire began to lead him out farther each day, first to the pasture, then to the ridgeline above the river where the wind carried the scent of pine and distant rain. She didn't ride him. She walked beside him, one hand brushing his mane, the other holding nothing at all. The rope hung loose, a symbol now, not a tether. One evening, under a bruised pink sky, she paused on the ridge and looked eastward. The valley stretched beneath them, wide, scarred, still healing from war's long shadow. Beyond the river lay the fields where Samuel had once trained young colts, his laughter echoing between fence posts. The ache came softly now, no longer a wound, but a weight she could bear. "You would have liked him. He's got your fire," she whispered. Valor's ear twitched at the sound of her voice. He turned his head slightly, as if listening to words meant for someone else. A gust of wind lifted her hair, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke from a distant farmstead. Claire's gaze drifted upward, storm clouds gathering in the north. "Let's head home," she said. As they descended, she slipped on the loose earth. Her foot caught a root and she stumbled hard. The rope slid from her hand. For a breath, everything stilled. The quiet before panic. Valor stepped back, startled by the sudden motion, muscles rippling beneath his coat. Then, instead of bolting, he lowered his head and moved toward her, nuzzling her shoulder. His breath touched her face. A low, reassuring sound, like a sigh through leaves. Claire froze. In that moment, she saw herself reflected in him. Not as she was now, but as she had been before the loss, before the war. Determined,
gentle, afraid, but alive. It was then she understood. All this time she had been trying to tame what could never be tamed. Grief, freedom, the wildness of life itself. But surrender wasn't weakness. It was grace. She rested her forehead against his muzzle, her breath mingling with his. "I don't need you to be mine," she whispered. "Just stay until the world feels kind again." The days grew warmer, the world began to bloom, and for the first time in years, laughter returned to the farm, quiet, tentative, but real. One afternoon, while repairing the corral, Claire found the half-buried horseshoe in the mud, rusted, cracked. She turned it over in her hand, remembering how Samuel used to call them good luck only after they had been lost and found again. She smiled faintly and placed it on the fence post, a small offering to whatever mercy had guided Valor back. Later, she began working with him more deliberately. Simple cues, soft commands. He responded not to discipline, but to patience. When she stepped away, he followed. When she stopped, he waited. Their movements became a kind of wordless dance, slow, precise, built on rhythm and respect. By late summer, she found herself saddling him for the first time. He stood still as she adjusted the girth, his ears flicking but not in defiance. Claire's pulse raced. "I won't push you," she said softly. "We'll do this together." She placed one foot in the stirrup, hesitated, then swung gently into the saddle. The world seemed to hold its breath. Valor shifted, testing her weight, then began to move, slow, measured, sure-footed. The sound of hooves against the earth echoed through the hills. Claire's hands shook around the reins, not from fear, but awe. They rode until dusk, the horizon awash in amber and violet. When they returned to the barn, both were covered in dust and quiet joy. Claire slid from the saddle and pressed her forehead against his neck. "Thank you," she whispered, "for staying." In that simple act, the trust of a wild heart, the courage to rise again, something within her mended. Later that night, as the crickets hummed outside and the lantern light flickered, she sat at her desk and wrote in her old journal for the first time since Samuel's death. The words came slow, halting, but true. Maybe courage isn't fighting with broken. Maybe it's learning to live gently with what remains. She closed the book and looked out the window. In the moonlit paddock, Valor stood beneath the willow, head bowed, at peace. For the first time, the farm no longer felt like a grave. It felt like home.
Autumn came early that year, a quiet silver season that turned the fields to ash gold and the air to glass. Mornings were sharper now, each breath visible, each sunrise carrying the faint smell of frost and wood smoke. The valley, once wounded by war and winter, seemed to hold its breath in fragile peace. Claire rose before dawn, as she always had. She brewed her coffee in silence, the old enamel kettle whistling faintly over the stove, and then she stepped out into the brittle air. The barn waited for her, warm light leaking through the slats, the rhythmic thud of hooves inside. Valor was awake, restless, alive. He pawed the straw and turned his head as she entered, eyes bright and alert. His mane had grown long again, his scars softened beneath a glossy coat. He was stronger now, not just in body but in spirit. Claire smiled. "Are you ready for another day?" He snorted, almost as if answering. The morning's training began like any other, deliberate, patient. They worked along the ridge, practicing short gallops and halts, the kind of movements that required perfect timing and trust. The ground was damp, flecked with frost, and the air tasted of pine. Every sound, every breath, every hoofbeat felt amplified by the stillness of the hills. Over the weeks, their rhythm had grown almost telepathic. Claire no longer needed reins, a shift of weight, a whisper of sound, and Valor understood. It was the kind of bond trainers dream of, the kind born not from dominance but shared survival. But that morning, she sensed something unsettled in him.
a tension beneath the calm. His ears flicked at every sound, muscles twitching beneath her touch. She murmured, "What is it?" Then she saw it, the distant plume of smoke rising from the East Valley. Not from a chimney, from the woods. A flicker of unease tightened her chest. The memories came rushing back. Nights when the sky glowed red with burning barns, the sounds of gunfire, the smell of loss. Though the war had ended, its echoes never truly left. She guided Valor toward the ridge for a better view. The smoke climbed steadily, dark and heavy, curling against the cold sky. A wildfire maybe, or worse, a homestead caught in its path. Her mind moved quickly. The East Ridge Trail ran down toward the Millib property, where an elderly couple had lived since before the war. Their son had never returned from the front. Claire's stomach twisted. "Let's go," she whispered. Without hesitation, Valor lunged forward. The wind tore at her coat as they galloped down the ridge, hooves pounding the earth like thunder. The world blurred around them, fences, fields, the glint of frost beneath a pale sun. The rhythm was raw, desperate, unstoppable. When they reached Miller Place, the fire was already roaring. Flames licked at the barn, and the old farmhouse roof had begun to sag inward. Claire pulled Valor to a halt, leapt from the saddle, and ran toward the porch. "Mr. Miller! Mrs. Miller!" she shouted. No answer. Smoke filled the air, choking her lungs, stinging her eyes. She covered her mouth with her sleeve and pushed through the doorway. Inside, the heat was unbearable, walls crackling, floorboards groaning underfoot. Then she saw them. Mr. Miller collapsed near the kitchen door, coughing weakly, trying to drag himself toward the exit. Claire rushed to him, grabbed his arm, and pulled him upright. "We have to go." He shook his head, voice hoarse. "Martha's still in the back room." Claire didn't hesitate. She shoved him toward the door. "Get outside, now." She ran deeper into the house where the flames licked at the wallpaper and glass shattered from the heat. The back room door was jammed. She kicked it once, twice. It splintered open. Inside, Mrs. Miller was on the floor, pinned by a fallen beam.
Claire's heart pounded. She tried lifting it. Too heavy. She braced her shoulder beneath it, pushed with every ounce of strength she had left. The beam shifted an inch, then another. Smoke filled her lungs. Then, through the roar of the fire, she heard it, a sound outside, low and furious. Valor. The stallion was pacing near the doorway, nostrils flared, muscles tense. When she dragged Mrs. Miller into the hall, he reared and slammed his hooves against the porch, as if calling her name. "Just a little more," Claire gasped. She hauled the woman across the threshold, just as the roof gave way behind them, flames exploding into the cold air. Valor backed away, neighing wildly. Claire collapsed beside them, coughing, eyes streaming. But both Millers were breathing, alive. For a long while, none of them spoke. The fire crackled and hissed behind them, devouring the home they'd built from nothing. When Claire finally stood, Valor moved close, his head lowering until his muzzle brushed her shoulder. She leaned against him, trembling with exhaustion, soot streaking her face. "You did good," she whispered. "You brought us home." It was the first time she realized just how far they'd come, not just from fear, but from grief itself. The fire spread through the valley that week, consuming acres of woodland before the rains came. Farmers worked side by side, rebuilding fences, hauling water, and sharing tools. Claire stayed near the Miller's property, helping where she could. Valor became a local legend, the war widow's horse who ran through fire. People spoke of him with reverence, as if he carried some divine instinct for courage. She never corrected them, she only smiled. But deep down, she knew it wasn't just Valor who had saved lives that day. It was something larger, the fragile, unspoken truth that courage was born from connection, not strength. Winter returned in whispers, the nights grew long again, and the snow came early. One evening, as she brushed Valor's mane beneath the lantern light,
She noticed something different in his eyes, a distance, a quiet yearning toward the open gate. She followed his gaze. The fence line stretched toward the hills, snow-dusted and silver in the moonlight. Beyond them lay the wild lands, the place where he had once lived free before humans had broken and claimed him. She knew what he wanted. The ache that filled her chest was familiar now, but no longer unbearable. She ran her fingers down his neck and said softly, "You've given me everything. I can't keep you from what you are." Valor blinked slowly, his breath clouding in the cold. She unlatched the gate. For a moment, he didn't move. He looked at her, one last still moment, then turned and walked into the snow. His hooves left perfect prints across the white field, vanishing into the dark. Claire stood at the gate for a long time, watching until the sound of him faded into silence. Then she smiled, not the brittle smile of survival, but the quiet grace of surrender. The next morning, the farm was still. Frost sparkled on the fence posts, and the willow branches bowed low with ice. She walked out to the paddock, half expecting to find him waiting, but only the wind greeted her. Still, she felt no emptiness, just peace. She whispered into the cold, "Run far, be wild, be free." And for the first time in years, her voice did not tremble.
Snow fell for days after Valor's departure. Heavy, silent, relentless. The kind that erased the world's sharp edges and left only the sound of breath and memory. Claire moved through the days with the steadiness of someone who had already survived too much to fear stillness. She repaired the barn roof, stacked wood, and fed the remaining horses. Life continued, as it always did after loss. Yet every morning, when she opened the gate, she found new tracks in the snow. Faint impressions of hooves leading down toward the creek, circling back through the woods. They appeared and disappeared with the storms, as if something ghost-like was watching from the tree line. She didn't dare hope, but she left the gate open. Then one night, near the thaw, a storm rose from the north. Sudden, violent, the kind that could strip a valley bare in hours. Wind screamed across the fields, rattling shutters, tearing branches loose. Claire hurried to secure the horses, her lantern flickering wildly in the dark. The sound came faintly at first, a distant cry, half buried beneath the storm. Then another, clearer this time, a whinny. Her heart clenched. She threw on her coat and stepped into the whiteout. The wind cut like knives, the snow blinding. But she knew the direction. Down by the frozen creek. She stumbled through the drifts, calling his name even though he wouldn't come that way. Then she saw him. Valor. Tangled near the creek bank, one leg caught between fallen branches and ice. His coat was matted with snow, his breath labored and white against the night. Oh God, no. She dropped to her knees beside him, fumbling at the snare. The branches had twisted around his foreleg like a trap, the ice sealing them together. Blood darkened the snow. "Easy, boy, easy," she whispered. He shuddered but didn't fight. His eyes met hers, wild still but no longer afraid. The storm howled around them, sleet slicing through her clothes. She used her bare hands, tearing the wood away splinter by splinter, ignoring the sting and cold. At last the final branch gave way. Valor staggered upright, trembling, his breath ragged. "Go!" she shouted over the wind. "Run!" But he didn't. He stood there, refusing to move, as if waiting for her. Lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the ridge above them, the snow shifting, the weight of ice building toward collapse. She saw it too late. The hillside groaned, and the avalanche came down. She turned, but Valor lunged first,
slamming his body against hers, forcing her sideways beneath the shelter of a fallen oak. Snow roared past like thunder, burying the creek in seconds. The world went white, silent, still. When the storm finally passed, Claire pushed herself up, coughing, shaking. The air was thick with ice and fear. She looked for him. Valor lay half-buried beside the oak, his flank rising shallowly, eyes half-closed. "No," she whispered, crawling to him. She pressed her hands against his neck, felt the faint, weakening pulse. "You saved me again." For a moment the world held its breath. She rested her forehead against his, tears freezing on her lashes. "Rest now," she whispered. "You've done enough." The wind softened. Somewhere above the ridge, dawn began to break, a thin wash of pale light across the snow. Claire stayed there beside him until the first birds called. She didn't cry when his breathing stopped. She only listened. The silence of it, vast and merciful. Later, when the valley thawed and the earth softened, she buried him near the willow by the barn, the same place he had first stood wild and untamed. She placed his halter under the roots, the rope coiled like a memory. In the weeks that followed, the world slowly brightened. The war felt distant now, the grief quieter. Claire no longer walked with the weight of ghosts. She tended her horses with a gentler hand and spoke to them more softly. Some nights, when the wind rustled through the fields, she swore she could hear the faint rhythm of hooves far beyond the fences, steady, free, eternal. She smiled at the sound. Valor had repaid the debt they both carried. Life for life, courage for courage. And though she remained, her heart finally ran with him.
Spring came quietly, as if afraid to disturb what winter had left behind. The snow melted into the creek beds, and the fields returned to green, shy at first, then bold. Life crept back in small, persistent ways. The first foal's cry in the stable, the first sunlight glinting on wet grass, the scent of thawed earth after months of silence. Claire rose early each day, but not from habit anymore. There was purpose again. Not the kind she once chased in the ring or the ribbons, but the quiet, honest kind that lived in tending, in seeing, in remembering. The farm had aged alongside her. Fences sagged, paint peeled, but it breathed. A place once haunted by echoes of gunfire and loss now carried the hum of steady life. The horses sensed it too, calmer, surer, their eyes bright in the morning light. In the paddock, a young mare lifted her head as Claire approached, pale chestnut, with a white blaze down her nose, a stray brought to her by a rancher 2 towns over. The mare had been found wandering the old forest road after the thaw, her coat still marked by faint scars of wire and frostbite. Claire named her Promise. The first time Promise let her hand rest against her neck, the air shifted. Not the wild defiance of Valor, nor the grief-soaked silence that had filled the years before him. Something new, something patient. Claire smiled. "We'll take it slow." Day by day, they built their rhythm. Groundwork, trust, quiet companionship. There were no grand displays, no breaking, no reins to prove mastery. Just 2 souls finding a shared language. When the mare hesitated, Claire waited. When she trembled, she spoke softly, the same way she once spoke to a boy gone too soon, to a horse that had run into the storm for her. By midsummer, the farm was alive again. Children from the nearby village came to help mend fences, laughter ringing where silence had once ruled. One of the older boys, shy with a limp from an old injury, took the brushing Promise's mane after chores. Claire watched from the doorway, the sun slanting gold through the dust motes, and felt something open inside her, light and forgiving. One evening, as dusk deepened, she walked to the willow,
The grass had grown thick around the mound where Valor rested, the wind combing through it like a living thing. She placed her hand against the bark. "I kept my promise," she whispered. A soft breeze answered, carrying the scent of rain and the faint rhythm of hoofbeats far beyond hearing. Later that night, Claire sat by the stable door, oiling her old saddle. It was cracked, scarred, much like her hands. The lamp beside her flickered low, and outside the stars burned clear and infinite. She felt the stillness, not as loneliness, but as peace. In the distance, Promise whinnied softly, and Clara rose, smiling. She walked to the paddock, boots crunching against the dirt, and stood beside the fence. The mare lifted her head, breath silver in the starlight. For a moment, the world held its breath again. Quiet, whole, forgiven. Claire reached out, fingers brushing the air between them. "You're safe now. We both are." The night deepened, vast and tender. Above, the aurora shimmered faintly, pale ribbons of green tracing the northern sky. Claire closed her eyes, listening. Somewhere in that light, in the rustle of leaves and the heartbeat of earth, she heard it. Valor's gallop, wild and free, echoing across the miles. Not as a ghost, but as a promise kept. And for the first time in years, she felt no weight in her chest, only the quiet certainty that courage wasn't something found in battle or sacrifice. It was found in the staying, in tending what remained, in letting the broken become beautiful again. When dawn came, she saddled Promise and rode out across the waking fields, her silhouette merging with the horizon where the land and sky met in pale gold. The wind lifted, carrying her laughter away, bright, unburdened, alive.